Well, welcome back to the Project Academy's Leading Through COVID-19 series. In this particular video, we're going to focus on putting our attention into those things that we can control and recognizing those things that we cannot control. In these difficult times, it's going to be tough for any of us to really differentiate between the things that are going to be useful for us as leaders to focus on, and also to then recognize the things that actually will be getting in the way of our clarity of focus, particularly those things that we definitely cannot control, and therefore somehow we need to try and find a way of letting those go, or at least doing some good risk management around the things that are uncertain. So first off, we're going to just have a little reflection on a book that I was reading over the last year or two. Was one that's on the screen right now. I'm not going to use the actual name of the title because there's a rude word in it, but let's call it The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Damn. And the key message that I took from this, and one that I just wanted to share with you now, was it really made me think about energy. In any one single day, we only have enough energy to give a damn about a certain number of things. Now, in a leadership position, there can be a multitude of things that we could choose to give a damn about, i.e. focus our time on. And the aspect there of being selective in what you give a damn about is recognizing the things that are within your control and power that you as a leader can focus on, and the things you just need to let go. And I really like that because there was an aspect here of resilience. If we choose to get upset, emotional, angry, or even indeed just put our energy into the wrong things, we are not going to be making solid decisions. We are going to take our mind off of the key strategic things that as a leader we need to focus on. It was like I noticed this coming into our offices here at the Project Academy to do the video this morning, and a couple of things caught my attention. One of those was an aggressive driver that was behind me, and of course part of me wanted to say that's all wrong and all sorts, and of course I was burning energy thinking about that situation. So reminding myself that I was going to do this video, I thought, no, that's one thing I don't have energy to give a damn about today. So we're going to look at selectivity in the things you can manage, the things you can only influence, and the things you can't manage. So there's a little model that I use with many of my clients, and it was a reflection with one of my clients once who had found that he was focusing on way too many things and putting too much energy into organizational matters that he just couldn't control. And this led to me devising just a little model that I use with many of my coaching clients called the 3 buckets. And what that is it's a call to reflecting upon the things that are bugging you, annoying you, the things that you're fighting perhaps, you're saying are wrong, and then exploring which bucket of the 3 you should be putting them in. Now, the 3 buckets relate to bucket 1, the things you can control, totally within your control. Bucket 2, the things you can only influence, and bucket 3, the things you can't control. Now, what I tend to find with my clients is that there's a lot of things that are actually should be applied into bucket 3. Things you can't control, but we somehow try to control them, or we play a loop story in our head, or even out to our colleagues and loved ones, that the things are wrong, they shouldn't be wrong, and somehow you're going to try and control them. Now, of course, that's a scenario where you're perhaps giving a damn about something you need to let go. So let's just look a little more detail into the 3 buckets. Now, one of the things around this is if we take the bucket that is things you can control, you may recall in one of my earlier videos about personality, some of us have a higher propensity towards what we call conscientiousness, which includes the subtrait of orderliness. So those that measure high in orderliness will have a tendency to want to control things and be more, should we say, a perfectionist, hence the orderly aspect in there. And within orderliness, in that subtrait, it actually has a sort of disgust mechanism. Human beings do have a disgust mechanism, which actually, in ancient times, I guess, protected us from, and it's quite appropriate in this day and age, isn't it, from diseases. And so this disgust mechanism links to orderliness. And so if you measure high in that, the chances are right now you're trying to control too many things that you cannot control. So it's worth reflecting. So let's take an example of something that can go in bucket one. Let's just say, and I'm going to use a non-managerial leadership thing here. Let's just say you've had an allergy test and you've been found to be intolerant to gluten. And so the doctors have suggested you need to cut gluten out of your diet. Well, you are in control of your diet. You have total control of what you pick up off your plate and put in your mouth and then put into your gut. So the fact that you may have been diagnosed with intolerance to gluten, you can't control that bit. So that would be an acceptance part. But what you can control is your diet. So have a think there. What are the things going on in your life right now that you have absolute control over, and recognize those and put them in a bucket one. The bucket two scenario is situations that you can only influence. So for example, if members of your team are having a really difficult time right now, maybe they've got challenges at home or they're struggling somewhat with their interpretation of COVID-19 and the future world. Now, you can't control that. You can't get into someone else's mind and completely manipulate them. So that's an influencing thing. As a leader, you can only seek to influence that scenario, and it's good to recognize that. You can't control how everybody in your team is feeling. You can't control, for example, stakeholders. Now, a lot of us, I think, in our world of stakeholder management, particularly in the world of projects, and I don't really like the word or phrase stakeholder management because it suggests you can control your stakeholder environment. Sorry, diagnosis is wrong there. The only thing you can really do there is to influence your stakeholder environment. So maybe you've got a difficult stakeholder right now, whether it's on a project or within your organization, and that's really been disruptive to you and also disruptive to your own thinking. Well, the thing is there to recognize you can't control another person, but you can seek to influence them. And maybe that's where it's appropriate for you to put those kinds of situations into bucket two. Maybe there are things going on in your organization right now that you don't find particularly palatable. There are things happening that you disagree with. Well, you may as a leader be able to influence that, but because you're interdependent on other people, you can't control it. So there's an aspect of letting some of that go. And then the third bucket, that's the bucket on the things you just cannot even influence. So for example, right now, many of us might be running a loop story in our minds and exuding that out to others that COVID-19 should never have happened. It's all wrong. How on earth did we allow, as governments around the world, for this to happen? How did the scientists allow it to happen? Now, you note in my tone as well, the tone tends to change. When we become judgmental on a situation we can't control, we start to suffer it. And that's one of the three options that you have. When you have a bucket three situation, you have three options to consider, and a mindful leader considers these options. Option one is, I'm going to continue to suffer this situation that I cannot control. And that often is linked to our language and our interpretation. So this thing's wrong, and you can see how people get wound up by it, and they're burning energy. And also they're pushing negative energy out into the environment. So a more helpful aspect from a mindful leader is to consider, am I going to accept this situation that I cannot control? That can really help to ease down our sort of our more emotional parts of our brain, our inner chimp, if you like, that is perhaps kicking off in situations that we can't control. So it can be good to point towards an approach of acceptance of situations you can't control. So for example, maybe your team is getting pretty upset and burning up their future resources of resilience by keep going over the same negative story about something they can't control. Well, I think this is when leaders do need to step in and redirect the team. You know, I'm not going to say I've got the right words here just now, but it might just be, guys, we cannot control this COVID-19 situation, but what we can control is this aspect of our project or our organization. So I'm going to suggest that we try and park and accept what is going on around us and deal with those things that we can control. And so there's this aspect of moving the focus of the team. What I would offer is observe which members of your team right now are suffering COVID-19 in the sense of suffering a non-acceptance of the situation, and then move people towards acceptance. Now, the third option you have, if you have a bucket 3 situation that you can't control, is to distance oneself. Now, that doesn't always work, but I think the option there is available to us more often than we think. So thinking of scenarios at work, in your career, for example, if you've been working in an organization where you're just not fitting in with the culture, or you disagree with the way that the business is going, it might be a bucket 3 thing if you can't influence it, but are you going to continue to suffer the situation? Maybe you found that it's just intolerable to accept the situation, and so you're going to distance yourself. Maybe you move from an organization. I mean, they often say that when people move organizations, they're not actually leaving the job, they're leaving their boss. And that's an example of where people can distance themselves, particularly from things such as relationships that they can't control, and that they find that they're not able to move into a point of acceptance. So whilst we can't control at an individual level the overall global pandemic right now, what we perhaps can control is to distance ourselves from the virus by abiding by the rules that are set by government and scientists. That's something where you're distancing yourself, you're accepting a wider situation, but then you can distance yourself from certain things. So you might want to link this into the videos we put together around personality, because as I mentioned earlier in the video, those of us that are dialed quite high on the conscientious trait within the Big Five, which lead us towards orderliness, will have a temptation to push things up from bucket 3 to bucket 2 and from bucket 2 to bucket 1. But this can be a really poor approach for us, because to try to control things that we can only influence or can't even control at all is going to be burning your future resources of resilience. So perhaps after this video, why don't you just take 5-10 minutes with a cup of tea or coffee and consider what are the things that are unpalatable to you right now, that you're resisting and that are causing you anxiety, and then separate them out into bucket 1, bucket 2 and bucket 3. And if you do that, you might start to gain a greater sense of how you can personally deal with these things and bring a little bit more control, but that's appropriate control, into your world and your work as a leader. So I hope that's been a useful reflection on controlling, influencing and not controlling certain scenarios. And we'll see you on one of our next videos. Many thanks. To receive our full suite of COVID-19 leadership videos, or to get in touch about how we can help you build your capability in project and change leadership, then please follow the details on the screen. We'd love to hear from you.